So welcome to tonight's session. I was really fretting this afternoon about how to begin the session, and I realized that the fact that it's happening at all is kind of an Askwith miracle, given the sheer number of events that have been canceled. All 4 of our guests are here, all of you are here, so that's kind of amazing and wonderful. So even if we did nothing else today, and we're gonna do a lot else today, like there is something really awesome that we're all assembled. So I'm thrilled that you're here. I extend my my warmest welcome to all of you and to everyone online, because I know we've got people online, so I'm thrilled that you're here and a part of this session. So I thought I'd do a little bit of setup, not too much so we can dive into the conversation, but I wanted to tell you what the session is about. Hopefully you're here for the right session. So we're going to be focusing on underrepresentation of women in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, both in terms of educational opportunities, but also workforce opportunities. So that's sort of the big idea. And I see a lot of familiar faces in here, so you know I love things in 3 parts. And so we're going to be guided by 3 big parts. So one question is about the motivation behind this, sort of like, why should we care about this? We're going to spend some time unpacking. As an HGSE grad, you know, we love to unpack. How do we bring greater nuance to our understandings of the issue? And then finally, action. This is an incredibly action-oriented place. This is a very action-oriented panel. What should we do? What could we do? What are we doing? Okay? So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit, this is the structure of the ideas. Let me tell you about the structure of the session, and this probably won't be a huge surprise. So we'll start out with some conversation amongst ourselves. I'll be here to ask a couple of questions. I asked our panelists to be, this isn't meant to be super stuffy or formal, really to talk with each other, ask each other questions as you see fit and feel appropriate in doing so. And then there'll be a chance for you to talk to your neighbors. We'll have a little break where you can chat with your neighbors. And then we'll come back together for a whole group conversation. So we'll get people online into the space. We'll get you asking questions. I wanted to point out a little bit about our process. So we've got Jane Everson and Paulina Hadawong who are going to be helping us with some of the Q&A portion of it. So if you're on Twitter, you can use hashtag Askwith to ask questions. We're also using a platform called Social Q&A. This is a way of expressing interest in a question and sort of upvoting a question if you're like really excited about it. So they're going to be monitoring that, and they'll be helping with asking questions in addition to the mics that we have. Okay? So that's our plan for today. Let me spend a little time introducing our panelists. So we have Jane Margolis. She is a senior researcher at UCLA in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. Her work, she's nodding like, yeah, that's factually accurate so far. So her work focuses on the reproduction of inequality, particularly in learning opportunities related to gender, race, and socioeconomic status. She is the author, I brought my copies, of 2 phenomenal books. Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing. So this is looking at gender in computing at the college level. And more recently, Stuck in the Shallow End. This is looking at race in computing at the high school level. She's an HGSE grad, as I mentioned. She did her Ed.M here and EDD here. Yeah. Okay. And is there anything else you wanted to add? No. Okay. Next to Jane, we have Stephanie Wilson. They're not, we're passing the baton. Stephanie is an engineer and a NASA astronaut. I sort of wondered, I sort of wondered if there was anything I needed to say after that, but I'll provide you a little more detail. So she's the 2nd African-American female in space. Your first flight was in 2006 aboard the space shuttle. She has logged more than 42 days in space. She is the recipient of numerous awards. I wrote these down because I was not going to be able to remember all of them. The Harvard Foundation Scientist of the Year Award, Harvard College Women's Professional Achievement Award, 3 NASA Spaceflight Medals, 2 NASA Distinguished Service Medals. You went to high school in Massachusetts, did Bachelor of Science in Engineering Science here at Harvard, and a Master of Science at University of Texas, Austin. Perfect. Okay, next to, after I said this was not going to be super formal, I'm giving these super formal introductions. Next to Stephanie, we have Maria Klawe. Maria is the current president of Harvey Mudd College. It's a phenomenal engineering school in Claremont, California. She is Harvey Mudd's 5th president, first female president. Before landing at Harvey Mudd, she was the dean of engineering at Princeton. Before Princeton, she was at the University of British Columbia for 14 years for doing this because she was the Dean of Science, among other roles at UBC, but she was my dean. So when I was an undergraduate major, she was my Dean of Science. So I was
And she's a good friend of my son.
So also recipient of numerous honors and awards, serves on multiple boards, including the board of Microsoft. She has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and a PhD in Mathematics from the University of Alberta in Canada. Wonderful. Last but certainly not least, we have Kimberly Bryant, who is the founder and executive director of Black Girls Code. This is an incredibly phenomenal organization that focuses on supporting girls of color to get involved in the fields of technology, computer programming with an entrepreneurship bent. Mm-hmm. It is an international organization, 7 sites in the United States, also in South Africa, so reaching more than 2,000 girls. Prior to the work with Black Girls Code, she spent 2 decades in biotech, was recognized in 2013 as a champion of change by the White House, too much recognition on this panel, but it's amazing. And then a Bachelor of Engineering from Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's, I hope I have, I don't even feel qualified to introduce all of you. So having done that gives you a flavor of who's on the panel. So let's begin. My first question is, you're all very busy. Why did you take the time to come here? Why is this issue important to you?
Okay. So my daughter is here at Harvard and is going to graduate from HLS. And any chance to see my daughter is always good. That's one.
Okay.
2, I had to be here this week anyway because the TAPIA conference is here.
Do you want to say what TAPIA is? Because it's
TAPIA is a conference that focuses on students of color, people of color, and people with disabilities in computer science. It's going to be here this week. It's super exciting. You really want to hear the keynote by Jackie Wright, who's the most senior African-American female at Microsoft. And she's talking, I think, at 9:45 on Friday morning. And then you want to hear this panel that has amazing people plus me on it that are talking about people who do diversity as well as when diversity becomes your life or becomes your passion. But, really the truthful answer is, I haven't seen Karen since she graduated from UBC, and I really wanted to see her because I've been tracking her for quite a while, and I really wanted a chance to see her in person. But, honestly, there's nothing, other than my kids and a few other things, my husband, more important than girls in tech.
I can jump in, sure. For me, I think it was important to be here and travel on red eye from San Francisco. So a little bit tired, but this issue always wakes me up and gets me energized because this is what my life's work is really working to open up the doors of opportunity, particularly for girls, but also particularly for girls from underrepresented backgrounds to technology and STEM. Because that was my path. So, many, many moons ago, I was a young lady getting a degree in engineering and not seeing too many people that looked like me. And even finding my path and my career path being very difficult, many challenges. And now I'm a mom and I have a daughter who's hopefully in a couple of years, if we get through this crazy high school period of time, will be maybe here or maybe up the road or across the river. Harvey Mudd. Yeah, she has a short list. It has a couple of schools I won't name, and Cambridge and Boston on it. But now she's tending to follow in my background, totally unexpected, but really focusing on making her path a little bit easier and focusing my work on trying to get more girls like herself and what I was so many years ago on this path a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I would echo what Kim has said. I mean, it really is important that young girls feel that there's an opportunity in STEM and that they see it as a viable alternative as a career. It really is important that we have someone to patch the torch onto. So we want to make sure that the path continues, that it's clear, and that they know that it's something that's available to them.
And I guess I'm here because this has been my passion for many, many years. And all of a sudden this issue of gender and diversity in computer science is getting lots of play. And I feel that the reason why I've focused on this issue is that I think it's a real lens into how inequality is produced in our society and how fields become segregated. And I am really passionate about that subject, and then how we can create social change to interrupt this segregation that's happening. There is something that I did when you said, is there anything else to add, which I realize is pretty pertinent to this, which was prior to coming to Harvard graduate school, I spent 7 years as a telephone installer, like one of the people that climbed the poles. And I had gotten a job out of college as a telephone operator, if people even know what those are anymore. But, I was plugging in the cords and everything. And then, this was in 1970, and then affirmative action came along and was looking for women to be in this male job. They were forced to by the government to bring women to be in telephone installers. So I volunteered and ended up doing it for 7 years. And never, ever, ever, when I had been a kid in high school, younger than that, would I have ever had said, I want to be a telephone installer, because there were no women in telephone installers, and I never even would have imagined it at all. And then when I did it, I realized that I fell in love with working with my hands and with tools and everything. And there's many, many layers of that story, but I think that it was from the 70s, having that experience for 7 years, that I had no idea, but it sort of created this mission about how fields become segregated and how inequality perpetuates itself. And so now we are in 2014, and people are paying attention, and I want to get my voice in. Because we got to go further and farther and faster.
So can we talk a minute about the 2014 aspect of it? So why is it so important now? What is the urgency now?
So, I'll say something about it. So first of all, I'm going to be super cynical. And the cynical reason that it's getting so much attention now is that there's a huge demand for computer science grads, and not just in the tech industry, but everybody needs computer science grads. Finance industry needs them, the oil industry, energy industry needs them, education industry needs them, entertainment. Okay, so one, there's a huge demand. Two, we don't graduate enough recipients of computer science degrees to meet that demand. And three, there's a cap on the number of immigration visas that are available. And so the tech industry and others who want to employ CS grads have suddenly realized that if we had as large a percentage of female college grads and college grads of colors, African Americans and Hispanic college students graduating with CS degree as white and Asian males do, they would meet that demand. So my cynical position is, because this has been something like Jane, I've been passionate about this particular issue since before 1990, so more than 25 years, and it sort of felt like one was out there calling in the wilderness. Pay attention, it matters. And now it's headline news. So my cynical take on it is it's an issue, a workforce issue that people are really realizing that we need many more people to graduate in computer science, and if we were able to get people who currently do not go into that discipline, it would meet that demand. My aspirational perspective on it is, I think there's a lot of people with children, including tech industry execs, who are realizing that these are incredible career opportunities, and they really want those opportunities to be available to everyone. And so, so that's the less cynical side of it. And I do believe that the people who are really pushing for this change are doing it for both reasons.
Or what?
Are doing it for both reasons.
Oh, okay.
I mean, both because there's a workforce need, and also that it's a social justice issue.
I like the cynical to aspirational spectrum. Where does everyone else fall on that spectrum in terms of thinking about the urgency of this issue now?
It seems as though it really has been, an issue for decades. And it may be coming to light now, but I think that people have very carefully been working on it, bit by bit throughout the years. And as we have more, we're able to bring more light to it, get more girls interested at an earlier age, and getting on an early career track, or getting on an early track with math and science, in middle school, in high school. I think that has helped, move the path forward. But I think that it has been something that many people have been working on for decades.
But the pushback I would give you is that, so we talk about STEM, but the truth of the matter is we have more STEM bachelor's degrees going to women than to men, and have had for probably at least 20 years. But they're mostly in biology and chemistry.
Right, mostly in the medical area.
And if we look at if we look at the situation for math, so when I did my undergraduate degree in math, it's horrific to think how long ago that was, but in 1973, probably less than 10% of the math majors were female. Today it's about 44%, and has been for quite a long time. But the problem about computer science is, back in when I got, my undergraduate degree, there were probably between 30 and 40% of the computer science majors were female. And it's only in the last 15 years that the numbers have gotten so awful. So, it was at 20% in 2000. And for PhD granting institutions, it's been between 11 and 14% for the last 5 years. So it's the only area of science and engineering where participation by women has declined. If you look at African Americans, you can see that their participation in engineering has actually declined slightly over the last 15 years. And if you look at Latina, Hispanic students, you can see that their participation has plateaued as well. So, the computer science is the area that has gone down for women. Engineering has pretty much plateaued or slightly declined for women and students of color. And then, biology and chemistry has way more graduates than the country can actually employ.
Yeah, I think it was those numbers that were the biggest wake-up call for me, because I often tell people that, I'm really an accidental engineer, that I always thought I would be a lawyer. And I always wanted to be a lawyer. I loved Perry Mason since I was like a kid. And I only went into engineering. I didn't know what that was. I was talking to somebody about that earlier. I didn't know what that was. I just was good in math and science. And so when I was graduating from high school, my guidance counselors, they encouraged me to look at engineering, because there was a huge push in the mid-'80s to get particularly more students of color into engineering fields. And I was just lucky to be about to go into college at that time. Only other person I knew that went into engineering before me was my older brother, and he only lasted about a year and switched to communications. I was just really too stubborn to quit. To be honest, I was really too stubborn to quit. But At that time, if you look at the charts, and even for women in computer science, that was a peak, like 35% or so. In '89, that's when I graduated. And now when you look at the numbers, that curve just like drops drastically, where all of the other engineering fields for women continues to increase, in the biological sciences, physical sciences. And that was shocking, because I distinctly recall when I graduated, Intel was big, so electronics and chips was big, but the personal computer, I remember discovering, the internet and like showing all my peers in my engineering job, look, we can type in all these codes and you can get into this thing called the internet. And so now that we see the industry is really, it touches everything, but women are not participating in it as participants that are creators. And so that was the thing that was the most shocking to me, because 35% really didn't seem that much when I was getting my degree in engineering, and now it's less, so African-American women, it's like 3%. That's nothing. That's like, it blows my mind that we've seen our participation and our levels in the industry have decreased that much when the field is growing so much.
I would say that the reason why it matters now, first of all, it's always mattered, and it matters in terms of individual opportunity, and everybody should have the opportunity to go into any field, be able to imagine that they could be in any field, and then be able to stay in it in a supportive way. But also for the health of the industry, so in our lives. So for instance, there weren't women designers with airbags, so they were designed based on a male prototype. The first voice systems were based on the male voice, so women could not be heard at all. And heart valves and all that kinds of stuff in medicine is based on, males. Taking the male body as the typical body. So it matters for what's being invented and what's being created. I think in today's world, computer science especially is affecting every single solitary aspect of our lives, and it's affecting our culture, and it's affecting democratic participation, so that people that know how to, create with the technology, how to program things for themselves, can actually are more empowered politically. So I think that in today's world, it is critical that all citizens have the opportunity and are participating in it. And I see it's an issue for the health of for the opportunity for individuals, so it's a civil rights issue, and it's a democracy issue in today's world.
So to pick up on that, and actually something that you mentioned in your opening remarks about challenges, what are the barriers? That's the aspiration. This is what we want to do. What is not making it possible?
Well,
You see that all of us women want to defer, and we don't want to hog the stage. So.
Okay, so, I just, I want to talk about what Kim is doing, because she is presenting coding to Black girls in a way that is fun, is empowering, is interesting, and is not lonely.
Mm-hmm.
It's social, right?
It is, absolutely.
Right? And, what I've seen at a whole bunch of institutions and a whole bunch of programs is that when you make computer science about creative problem solving, when you make it social, which, believe me, if you work in the industry, it is social, it's team-based. When you make it not scary and intimidating, and when you show people who look like real human beings rather than, people who've been stuck in a basement for 19 years coding. I just want to make it clear, I'm married to one. I am one. So I really like nerdy people. my daughter points out, my oldest child is one, so, like I like nerdy people, but still, not everybody likes nerdy people, and lots of people, would like to have role models that they could actually identify with. And the places that do that, they have tons of people who are doing well. So, as I once heard Alan Fisher, who worked with Jane Margolis on one of the seminal studies about what it takes to make computer science appealing to young women at Carnegie Mellon. And I was watching Alan give a talk, it was actually at Princeton, and he goes, "It's not rocket science." Sorry, Stephanie.
It always is about rocket science.
and it's easy to do this. So, it's not expensive. I mean, computers used to be expensive. Now they're cheaper than a textbook. It's amazing. It's not expensive. It's not difficult. There's really no reason that you wouldn't teach computer science in a way that is incredibly engaging for everybody. And yet, most places don't.
Right.
And here we have, is your name Scratch Mom?
Mercifully, no.
What is your name? There is a name that they have for you, because she's sort of Scratch Guru, only it's a feminine version of that.
Getting arm crossed, I don't know.
Okay, well, just in case you don't know, Professor Brennan, I believe runs a forum for people who want to help teach Scratch to students, and it has some kind of name.
Yes. So actually, my colleague Michelle helps me run that. It's called Scratch Ed. So yeah, helping teachers think about all these things. How do we make computing creative? How do we make
think
it
she's
social?
Scratch Mom.
AKA Scratch Mom.
Or maybe Scratch Genie.
We'll work on the naming.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the points I'm making is, I think there's an awful lot of people in this room who actually know how to make this happen. And the big question is, how do you actually inspire a whole bunch of people to actually get up and do it?
So is it just about inspiration? So barriers, challenges.
I think it's about, there's a bunch of different barriers and challenges. So one of them is that there's an awful lot of schools that do not have computer science teachers. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that people who know enough computer science can get highly paid jobs in industry. That's part of it. So most young people who go to college today have not had much exposure to computer science. So that's one piece. A second piece is that I think there's a number of things that have happened historically over the last 15 years that are unfortunate. So one of them is there was the dot-com bust and outsourcing in the early 2000s. And there was this guy called Lou Dobbs who talked constantly about how there were no more software jobs because they'd all been outsourced to India and China. And so there was this meme out there that, you shouldn't major in computer science because all the jobs were gone. It turned out there was a slight dip between 2002 to 2003 in the number of IT jobs reported by the National Labor Statistics Group, and then it was back up again by 2004. So it was 1 year when it declined and has grown since then. But so there was this message that got out there that says computer science jobs are gone. Then there was the recession. And shortly after the recession, so the recession meant that there were a lot of cuts to budgets, particularly in public universities in this country. And then shortly after that, the word got out that computer science the jobs are crazy and really well paid, and everyone's looking for them. And so we had a lot of computer science departments that went through a boom and then a crash in their computer science undergraduate population, then a recession where their budgets were cut, and then a huge boom again. And if you're asking them at the same time to think about changing how they teach computer science to make it more friendly to women and students of color, it's sort of like, oh, everything's falling on my head at once. So, I think part of the complicated thing is, though, even though it's not hard to do, it caught the discipline at a time when it was hard to respond.
I think there's another obstacle, really big one, which is I think that there is such a myth that computer science belongs to people that are geniuses and super smart. And that in this society, that is identified with white and Asian males, and people of color and females are really doubted deeply for their intelligence, commonly. And I know that it's changing in some ways, but I think that, for instance, this myth that goes around in the world of computer science that it's a meritocracy, and people say, that it's a meritocracy and anyone can do it, is like really minimizing the unequal opportunities that a lot of people have to get, the preparation to go into this field, and the culture that people face every step of the way, and the culture which is sort of doubting your right to belong if you're female or a person of color. And I know that it's changing, and this is where, I believe that it's changing in some ways because there's been the women's movement and there's been more women's leadership, and we have, Obama as president, and, there is this change, and there's men who have daughters, and they know their daughters are smart, and they want to have opportunity for them, but there is such deep notions of intelligence and capacity, and in this country, that I think that culture is a ghost that accompanies people every step of the way. And so when I think of the obstacles, like how do we change that culture? And that's when the work of, I know that a lot of companies are looking at implicit bias and all of that research.
So I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Which we actually agree about pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, I certainly know that for everyone, so I know that every time I walk into a room, the fact that I'm female is, so I'm going to walk into a room that has a bunch of, so if it's computer scientists, the fact that I'm female means that I probably don't have very good ideas or know much about things. And if it's a bunch of business executives, the fact that I'm academic, that's a double whammy, because now I'm a female academic, and of course I don't know anything about anything. So, I mean, I certainly agree that women encounter that, and it's not just in the tech industry, it's in medicine. I mean, one of the things that astounds me is that, we've been producing half of the doctors being female since probably sometime in the 70s, and yet, if you look at the number of deans of medicine who are male, it's probably can be counted on, like that many fingers. So, this whole, and if you're African American and female, you've got it, it's more than double, because I think it multiplies rather than adds. though 1 times 1 is 1, so that doesn't quite work. But anyhow, on the other hand, I think there's lots of research that shows that persistence and hard work is much more important to succeed in any area of science and engineering than quote-unquote native ability. Luck is also, and confidence also play a role. But the actual, hard work is a very big part of it, but that's not what we tell our children. And that's not what the myth is about computer science, which is unless you're incredibly smart and born with a coding gene, which happens to be on the Y chromosome, I guess, you're not going to succeed.
I would also say that from the work that I do with younger girls and younger students, that there really are some serious structural issues in terms of young people in the K-12 pipeline, especially from underrepresented communities. When we look at the schools that they're primarily at, they're very low resource, very high poverty, as a given, tend to be. And so in those environments, they're not having this access and exposure that even gets them kind of set on that pathway to even knowing that this career exists. So in the school, in many of the schools that we work with and in many of the communities, these kids don't even have access to like simple things like Wi-Fi, or you may, if they have a computer lab, I've been in one that was a brand new school in Oakland, and they had Bubble Max. This was like a year ago, and I was like, I bought one of those for my daughter like 10 years ago, and you have this in your computer lab. It kind of blew my mind. And that was one of the few middle schools in the city that actually had a computer lab. So I think when we look at that, that really impacts, especially girls from underrepresented community, African American, Latina, because they are not starting on a level playing field. They're not there. And so now we have to get through that barrier of not starting on a level playing field to even catch up with their peers.
And obstacles and challenges, one way to look at it is also to talk about what has worked. And Maria talks about perseverance and determination, and that is really something that I think goes a long way. You really have to be wanting to stay the course and realize that it's a marathon, and stay in there for the long haul through the ups and downs. There'll be some good times and there'll be some bad times. There'll be hard days and there'll be some easier days, but that's probably not something that we communicate to girls who are interested in STEM. And also, when we talk about schools, when we talk about middle schools and high schools, having sort of a different teaching approach, perhaps doing it a little more collaboratively. So something that I enjoyed when I was in middle school was that for those of us that were struggling with math, with a particular concept, the teacher would stay after school, we would work the problems together, it'd be very collaborative, much like a math club, and so making it a little more social seems to be something that can be helpful. And also when we talk about engineering, we have in recent years started talking about it in a way that lets people know that engineers help people. We solve problems, we try to bring things to society that's very helpful, and it has attracted more women to the field because it's talking more about how to help society and how to help people, much like the medical industry sort of naturally promotes itself that way, and that has been something that's been helpful. So as we talk about obstacles and challenges, also looking at things that have helped and trying to make those models more mainstream would be something that would help us.
So yesterday I was talking to Sue Desmond-Hellman, who's the CEO of the Gates Foundation, and she had just been to Davos for the first time, and before that to some biomedical conference. And she said that both of them were, I'm not quoting her, because she would have been much more delicate than this, but basically they were just testosterone-driven firestorms. I mean, just sort of, and because they were very, very largely male, both conferences, and very, very largely white. And so the biggest question I want to think about is how to change the perception of society that the people with the power and the people who have the right to be in the power, the people who have the right to be the smart people in the room, the people who have the right to be the computer science geniuses are white and Asian males. And so I do have, a solution, and I've mentioned it many times, and it never gets done. But I really think that if we had a wonderful TV show, a really successful one, that showed young people of color and not of color, and males and females, who were actually working on important problems using their technical skills, and who had a love life and all the kinds of things that go on when you watch, whatever, House or a law show or whatever, Park Mason or LA Law, for those of us who are old enough to remember that, we would see a very big change, because I think the problem is that the image, we know when we work in the industry and when we, spend our lives working on problems that we think are really important to society, we know that this is what you can do with that education, with those skills. But the vast majority of people in the general public have no idea that that's what you could do if you got that kind of education.
I think that it's interesting that you brought up Sue, because when I moved to the Bay Area, I moved there to work for Genentech, and at that time Sue was there.
Was she still there now?
Yeah, and she was VP, so I spent my career seeing women in the VP roles. So when I decided to leave and really get into the startup industry, that was the first thing was shocking to me, is that I didn't see any women in these spaces, in these rooms. And I was like, what is going on? It's just not something that I was used to, because the biotech and pharma industries tend to be more diverse. They have lots of room still to grow, but nothing like technology. And so I was used to have women as VP, used to have women as directors, and used to seeing women making the decisions. And so it never occurred to me that we couldn't get to those levels, that I couldn't rise through the organization. And that points to the image issue being so significant, because when we don't have women at the helm of these tech companies, then it sends a message, even though, it may not be an outright message, but it absolutely sends a message to women all along the pipeline that this is not a place for you, or your opinions and ideas are not valued here. And I think that's one of the obstacles that we have to change, to your point, is making sure that women are represented all along this technology pipeline, and that we see clear pathways and models for how to get more women there.
Were you gonna add? I felt like you were about to say something.
I'm just, the issue makes me so mad. I just,
Yeah, you can pound the
we're all
table,
being
Jane.
very polite, but it makes me so mad. And that I see it as this really, it's an indicator of so much. It's an indicator of so much bias and so much prejudice and so much unequal resources, because now my resource, the last 10 years, I've been working in the LA public schools. And so I see that in schools that have predominantly African American and Latino kids, that what is considered to be, what is called computer science, are really just the basic rudimentary, like keyboarding classes. And then you'll see in schools with more in the white area, they'll have like the full range of computer science. And so you see how the inequality, it starts so young, and it just follows, and then you get to the higher levels, and then there's all the cultural assumptions and the biases. So this whole issue of why STEM, especially computer science in today's world, is mostly, white and Asian male, and it's so segregated, is just such an indicator of how our society, all this stuff that has been going for so long. And so the question is, what can we do to change it? And I feel that all social change that really has happened in the past was done through more political protests. So the women's movement, the Civil Rights Act, all of that was people in the streets and taking action, and yet people don't do that anymore. And so I feel like what I feel would really do it is like if there were big protests outside of Microsoft and Google and forcing this to happen, then they would maybe consider it. But that seems like such an outdated notion in today's world.
Okay, so I'm gonna push back on that one.
Okay. I'm just trying to.
We committed that we were gonna have a fist fight in front of all of you. And it was hard to see where it was actually gonna happen, but, so I had an interesting experience this summer. I was, there's a conference for computer science department chairs, typically of from places like Harvard or Boston University or MIT, where they have PhD programs in computer science. There's typically 200 or 300 attendees, and I was trying to figure out how I could actually get some number of these departments to start changing, to start working on exactly these issues. Now, they're probably not going to be teaching computer science in the LAUSD schools, which I got to tell you, LAUSD, I think is the most broken school district I've ever seen. Just such a mess. But
Oakland.
it's smaller.
DC.
Yeah, we're like all of them.
Yeah, okay, we can all have our favorite broken school district, but yeah. But I am absolutely convinced that if we started to, if every university, so if you look at universities, I'm convinced we can at least fix the problem for females. It's a lot harder to fix the problem for low-income college goers because they tend to have had, and most of our African American and many of Hispanic students are going to be in that category, and they're going to have had horrible preparation before they get to college. But let's at least say that we could have, let's say 50% of the people entering the tech force being female, that would be doable. And so my idea was to try and get some percentage of these department chairs to actually start working on the issue in their departments. Because as I said before, it's not hard and it's not expensive. And so I gave them 8 examples of departments that had actually worked on this over the last few years and had made significant progress. And I did talk about Harvey Mudd, and yes, we do lead the country in the percentage of our, other than women's colleges, and the percentage of our CS majors that are female, it's about 40%. We also, in engineering, it's about 50%. So we've done well with women in both cases, but I didn't want to use Harvey Mudd because, first of all, it's tiny, it's private, it's quote unquote elite. We compete with Stanford and MIT and Caltech for our students, et cetera. So I led with Cal Poly SLO. Now this is the East Coast, so you probably don't know Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, but it's one of the California State universities, and they were at 12% female in their software engineering and computer science program in their entering classes 5 years ago, and this year they were at 29%. And so in those 5 years, they went through a huge budget cut because California had a big recession. They have all kinds of constraints, like they recruit to the major, and they can't control who gets admitted. So, and yet they managed to do this change. So they didn't have a lot of money, and they didn't have a lot of the levers that places like Harvey Mudd or Carnegie Mellon or other places could pull. But yet they did it. And when you looked at what all of the departments that made the change did, it was very straightforward. It was one, they changed their intro courses so that they were interesting and less intimidating to the incoming students, both males and females. 2, they created a culture of community and confidence for their female students. And they did things like take them to the Grace Hopper Conference, Celebration of Women in Computing, and, you know, start a mentor program, having an outside speakers program, bringing in women, starting a club, getting them t-shirts. I mean, just really basic stuff, okay? They did outreach to high schools, both teachers and students, and especially for public universities that tend to be recruiting from a region, that's extremely effective. And then for some of the institutions, this is not Cal Poly SLO because they're not allowed to do this, they promoted joint majors between areas like biology and chemistry and psychology, where there are tons of women, but where getting a joint degree in computer science and music or linguistics or anthropology or whatever is going to both make that person more successful in the other field if they stay in anthropology, biology, or music or whatever, and also make them eligible to work in the tech industry at outrageously high salaries, $100,000, $105,000 a year after a bachelor's degree. So anyway, I'm talking to a couple of hundred department chairs, and I really want them to sign up to do this. So I decided on the spur of the moment to resort to bribery. So, you know, what I said was for the first 10 department chairs who would volunteer to work on this and to work on at least 3 of those 4 approaches I told you, I would try to help them get money to send their students to the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing. Before I finished my talk, I had 15 people sign up, department chairs. Now, I didn't have any money to do this at that particular moment, but within 3 days, I had commitments of several $100,000 from Facebook, Microsoft, and Google. And then, well, there was this embarrassing part that I didn't know about 4 of the department chairs because they were in my junk mail folder, and then I found them a week later, so then I went to Intel. But the bottom line is, we have 15 departments. They're called the BRAVE departments. They're mostly public institutions who are getting $30,000 a year from this project. We also, with help from Jane, we have a Professor Linda Sachs at the same graduate school and graduate education information studies at UCLA, who is doing a research project to study what actually happens in these departments. So for a very small amount of money per department, we have 15 departments actually working on this, as well as, you know, the opportunity to study what they're actually going to do. So my idea is, if we can prove in, say, 3 or 4 years that these 15 departments can move the needle, we'll be able to get 150 departments to do it. And we'll be able to get funding from the tech industry and from lots of other people to make it happen. Now, it's not solving the problem in the schools that Jane's talking about. It's not solving the equity problem for low-income students, because those are the kids who are, you know, in that situation. For those kids, initiatives like Black Girls Who Code, the Code.org's Hour of Code initiative, Jan Cooney at the National Science Foundation's effort to get 10,000 computer science teachers in the schools, Scratch.ed, Scratch Ed, what Prof. Brennan promotes, the edX courses that are making it easy for teachers who don't know anything about computer science to actually teach a middle school computer science course. There's a lot of initiatives out there. You know, I guess what I really believe, if we could fix the gender issue, it would make it easier to fix the people of color issue. Because I think if you can show that women, in spite of the fact that they're female and they wear lipstick, and I will explain that comment in a second, they actually are just as smart and just as capable, it will make it that much easier to prove that people of color are also just as smart and just as capable. And the lipstick comment is because I was talking at UCLA, I think it was last week, and I had a UCLA CS prof say to me, nobody who wears lipstick can possibly be a computer scientist. And then I asked the young women in the audience, how many of you wear lipstick when you go, and these were computer science majors, how many of you wear lipstick when you go out on a date? And at least 2/3 of them put their hands up. And then I asked the young men in the audience, and how many of you young men wear lipstick when you go out on a date? And at least one young man put his hand up, which I really totally loved.
Okay. Do you want to pause just for a moment? We'll pause just to give you a chance to talk to each other, because I'm looking at the time and I'm feeling the gaze of the Askwith organizers bearing down on me, because I want to make sure we have time for some questions. And so let's take a couple of minutes, chat with your neighbor, then we'll come back, we'll get some questions from Paulina and Jane, and then also at the microphone. Okay, we'll just take a couple of minutes. So we've got questions,
Okay.
but our guests are enraged that I cut them off, so they started fighting during the break. So I'm going to let them.
Okay, so go for it, Kim.
We're going to do that, and then we might get to questions. Okay, so what was happening during the break?
Well, I missed a part of the break, but I was mid-sentence when we went into break, so I was just going to say a little bit and then throw it right over to Jane, because I know she has my back on this, is that one thing that I did tend to have a different opinion on than Maria is that if we lead with women in terms of increasing representation, that it will have a causal impact on the number of people of color in the field. And I don't find that to be the case because there are different structural barriers that come into play. So there's a huge issue that I talk about a lot with intersectionality of being both a woman and a woman of color, and they're not the same. So the challenges are not the same. The remedies are not the same. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Okay, so I admit, you're right, I was wrong.
Right. And, but I've seen this, and I think Jane was mentioning that, if you look at the history in terms of equity and rights, I've seen this throughout my career in corporate America. That tends to be the easy answer. This is me being a little bit radical. That tends to be the easy answer for corporate America is let's lead with women, let's get women right, and then we'll work on everything else. It never ends up being the answer. And we still see vast differences in underrepresentation for people of color.
And I would just say, I in general agree that it may not necessarily be true that if you bring women, you're also bringing people of color. It's possible that it could be true, but I don't know that it directly correlates necessarily. I think what's most important is that the individual sees herself in that role and has a way to enable a path to become a person in that role. And I think that that's what's most important, is being able to look forward, having the forethought, and seeing yourself in that role.
Well, true, but again, I would point to this study. So there's a recent series of reports that NAACP Legal Defense Fund did. One is called Unlocking Opportunities for African American Girls. And it goes by piece, all the different barriers that girls from African American communities face. STEM is just one slight part of that report. But it talks about how girls of color receive excess discipline, how they are they are victims of sexual violence. I can tell you without a doubt it's only by luck. I was one of those girls that was excess discipline all the time. So it was only my grades that saved me. That was the only thing. But what about those other girls that don't necessarily have that support or the grades that someone will look a little bit deeper? Because I could have went a different pathway. Because of the things I was, I tend to be a little bit more assertive, and that's not the feminine trope that women generally are seen. And when you put African American girls in that trope, they don't necessarily tend to always rise to the top. So I think it's very different when we put the intersectionality of race into the plot. But I mean, I'll let Jane take that away because I know
Boy. Okay, so I think that leading with women is a cheap and easy ask on the part of the corporations. And that's why I'm kind of like boiling inside, because they're having a lot of pressure put on them now to diversify. And so they are feeling like doing it with women is the way they're doing, and they're forgetting the intersectionality and race. And what they're really forgetting is the kids from under-resourced schools, because it's so hard to take on this issue of inequality and the unequal distribution of resources and education in this country. So just today, and one of the reasons why I'm boiling over, is that just today I heard there's going to be a big conference coming up sponsored by one of the tech companies to figure out how to reach high potential African American, Latino, and women, high potential students to get into these high tech companies. That word, high potential, is like basically it's the cynic approach that industry is just caring about getting to diversify themselves, but they're not caring about the unequal distribution of resources and opportunity in this country. So all of us that work in this women in STEM field kind of are taking different paths. There are people that are taking the path of let's get women into STEM, and then maybe the other inequities will follow. There's industry people that just have the pressure of outside forces to diversify, and then there are people that are wanting to have, which I think are the people working in the schools that are trying to deal with this deep-seated inequality in our country. And maybe people will say, well, that's just too much to get at, but I feel that's where we have to get at to really, it's just what we have, it's a moral imperative. And I feel that it's been a moral imperative forever, and I feel it's the moral imperative of today. And that this issue of STEM and computer science reveals just so much of inequality.
Let me build on that, if
Okay.
I might. Okay. So I don't think this is a problem that is going to be easily solved at any single place.
Right.
Okay. So, I will just say I misspoke. I got it wrong when I said maybe if we solved the women thing, and if I look at Harvey Mudd, we've been working incredibly hard to get more students of color, and we've seen a very significant increase in both African American and Latina students over the last 2 years. So doubling or tripling the numbers in both cases. And so I'm hoping that we can prove that those students are, going to be just as successful as our women and so on and so forth. However, the reason why I say you have to do it at all levels, I'll just say that any student of any gender or race is privileged, who comes to Harvey Mudd is privileged because they had to have had a pretty good high school education in order to be prepared. And it's also true if they're going to MIT or Harvard or whatever. I mean, these are, in general, students. I mean, they could be from low-income families, but it probably means that they then got a scholarship to a better school, one way or another. So I think it's actually important, and I don't want to be, I was cynical about the tech industry, but I want to say the vast majority of people who I know who work in the tech industry, and I know lots of them who care about diversity, it's not just about getting their daughters or they really do care. I mean, if I have a student I can recommend who's African American, male or female, they are just dying to make offers to them. So it's not, it's really, I don't think, I can be quite cynical, but I honestly believe the people in the tech industry who are trying to change this, they're trying to change it for everyone. But now let me come back to the schools. So over the last several years, I've worked on 2 initiatives, and that are at the K-12 level. One is Math for America in LA-USD and some of the other Los Angeles school districts, and the whole idea is to put teachers who are passionate and really highly skilled teachers of mathematics in middle schools and high schools, and they're virtually all in very low-income schools, and try to raise, because I think math is one of the big math scores is one of the big inhibitors for students going into STEM careers of any kind, I'd love to be able to tell you that what we're doing there, we now have I think about 80 teachers in the program. I'd love to tell you that it's making a difference. Well, you look at the size of LA-USD, and it's going to be decades before we actually make a difference. So the other thing I've been working on, and it just launched, it will officially launch on March 4th, is to actually try to get better curriculum out there. in all areas, but starting with math. And so there's a new organization called Ed Reports, which is by teachers, for teachers, and it's supposed to be the version of Consumer Reports that looks at curriculum it's starting with K to 8 math, and talks about whether it's rigorous, whether it's aligned to the Common Core, whether it showcases the appropriate mathematical practices, and whether it's actually usable. And so we have just finished doing reviews of the 21 most used sets of materials, and only one of them made it through out of 21, made it through all 3 gateways for, alignment with Common Core, good mathematical practices, and usability, which, really tells you something. So it's not that I disagree with you at all about where the issues are, but I think we constantly have to look at where you actually have traction. And I was arrested at the age of 17 for being in a student protest at Berkeley. My parents were horrified, I will say. So it's not that I haven't had periods in my life when I really believed in protesting in the streets. But I think if we're really going to change this world, you have to apply the levers at all the places you can get.
I think I agree with that, but I think my point, and I don't want to speak for Jane, but my point is that we need to push and put a little pressure on industry to solve the hard problems. The problems that we have to solve, I think we can all agree, are not going to be easy. And the thing that makes me a little bit uneasy with the term high potential is because who's defining that? So let's deconstruct that a little bit. My perception of a high potential youth of color from a low opportunity community is perhaps quite different from someone sitting in the executive suite at one of these technology companies. And that's the difference and the bias that we automatically implicitly bring to that evaluation that tends to close the door or push the door up. So a student of color from a low opportunity school district that has a 2.0 is not considered high potential. But that has nothing to do with whether or not that person can code or can be taught to code. So I always get a little skirmish when I hear the term high potential, even though I perhaps was classified as a high potential youth coming up when I was growing up and put into these optional school programs. But kids like that, even if we're coming from low income, low potential school districts, we're probably gonna succeed regardless. I'm trying to get the kid that doesn't have that opportunity. I'm trying to get the kid that is only getting a 2.0 because let's look at the structural deficiencies in the system that are making him not be able to achieve. Let's look at the bias that teachers are bringing into the classroom that ignores these students that really can learn if they are taught in a way that really meets their needs. And so I want companies to do the hard work. I don't want them to do the easy work. I want them to solve the hard problems because I think that's when we'll really make change. We'll really see real change happen in this country. And if we look at things like the civil rights movement, it's when we made the hard choices that we really made growth. We really had growth and opportunity. We have to do the same thing when we're approaching this problem.
I just want to throw out, I totally agree with that, and I also agree with that you need to find the levers, to make the change. But I guess the slogan that I would say captures why I'm so upset with this high potential notion is that many of the companies are trying to identify talent of diversity that they can bring into their companies, and because they maybe really believe in diversity and they want to bring it in. So they want to identify the high potential, what they call high potential talent. But our program that we run in the LA schools and nationwide called Exploring Computer Science, we talk about building talent. as opposed to identifying talent. So it's kind of building, giving equal opportunity of resources, changing the school system, the structure of the school system, the beliefs of the teachers, getting teacher professional development, because of all these students that are in these schools that have incredible high potential if they were given the opportunities. But those are not the students that the companies who are taking the easy way right now are looking at. And so it is, I do feel we're at this kind of crossroads of all of us in this movement, are at this crossroad of where we put our time and energy. And I'm really glad that I feel that this conversation, we should stop now so everyone else can. Just stop. But I feel like this conversation really highlighted a tension that we've been all working with.
Well,
Go.
and I just wanted to say, it is a multifaceted problem.
Yes.
And I think that there will likely be many approaches to try to come to a good solution. And perhaps, one approach would be to impress upon these companies, Microsoft and so forth, to come into the schools and to help the teachers and to help supplement the work that's done at the schools to talk about, as a career approach, this is what a computer scientist does. As an engineer, this is what an engineer does. And to really bring those resources back into the schools, because those are the students that will come forward to populate those companies. And so really having it be a circular effort where the companies give back to the schools, and then they'll see the fruits of their labor come through into the companies.
Mm-hmm. That I see we're already past time, so that is a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that we did not get to questions, but
Can people just ask questions?
Let them ask
Let's
questions.
go over.
where's
Can
Jody?
we just go over?
Do you,
I mean, this is
Well,
Harvard. Can't
go-
you just
I'm
go
getting-
over?
break the rules. I guess there's a question. Do we want to go over here, or do we want to go over upstairs where there's
No,
refreshments?
here.
You want to do it here? Okay.
Yeah.
Upstairs can wait.
Okay. Let's do this. Let's start a question here, and then we'll go to the mics.
Oh.
Okay.
I think our first question is for Stephanie, and that's, as a role model, you play that role really well. Would you speak to how role models can influence women in the STEM fields, or girls to enter the STEM fields, or how they should carry themselves, what they should do?
I think that it is important really for girls to be able to see themselves in various roles and to have those role models, to have somebody who has gone forward and done something similar. And in my case, I was very fortunate through my middle school. I actually had a career assignment class, and I was given an assignment to interview somebody who worked in an interesting field. So I interviewed an astronomer at Williams College, Jay Pasikoff. And that was the start for me of seeing myself in a role, working in science or engineering, in a role working in the aerospace industry, and then eventually in a role as an astronaut. And for me, I just needed to see somebody there. But I do think it is important for girls to see women in those roles as well. I have a lot of engineers in my family, so I had a lot of role models in that way, seeing people studying engineering and going into that area. So that was very helpful. So it is important, I think, to be able to visualize the end of the road and to make sure that as you see that visualization, that you see a clear path.
Okay, shall we do like lightning round of questions? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hi, my name is Esther Shilkrat, and I'm telling you that because I need your help. I'm somebody who comes from poverty. I went to college, 100% free ride. I went to grad school, 100% free ride. But the catch was I picked a grad school that would let me do it because it was computer science. I am not the type of person who would normally do computer science, but I have a PhD in it, in user interface, which is going to matter in a second. I have taught in not very good colleges, and I have seen the problems of underexplained kids and inner city kids. I have seen those things. I have had those kids. And I taught 120 young ladies at Simmons who didn't even know the course was programming because it didn't have a defined thing. And I walked in, I got to teach something, that's what I know, so I teach programming. And they learned it, because I make you write code. None of this ABC, which one is it? You write a program for me, so I know you didn't cheat. Here's the thing. I escaped through good luck and culturally, partly because I am Jewish, and in a Jewish society, when I grew up, you go to college. There's no two ways about that. And I know that gave me a head up over people who come where they don't have that as a background, that you're going to college. I'm writing a course. I wanted to say I hate Scratch. I did a user interface PhD. And I read ThingLab and Smalltalk and all this stuff, and Scratch to me makes no sense. And somebody with my level of knowledge should figure that out in 5 minutes. And I will point out to you that it is a linear thing. It is not two-dimensional, it's linear. What does that mean? It is not pictorial, it is just whatever. I also will point out to you that Dijkstra, whatever his first name was, Edgar or something, says you should start with logic. And I think the reason that I was able to do computer science was because, from philosophy, was because I had a very good logic course. I think he's totally onto it. So the reason I said I want your help is because I have developed a course that I taught once a little bit at MIT during their independent activities, which is coming at it a completely different way. And I think we need more than one way, because there's more than one way of thinking. Had I had to learn Scratch, I would not be in computer science today. Learning Fortran was much more straightforward. The pictures don't do it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Multiple pathways, certainly. Awesome. Questions? We'll go over here, and then we'll toggle back and forth. Okay.
I don't really have a question. Is this on?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm a public school teacher in Boston Public Schools. I went to Harvard 20 years ago, and ever since then I've been teaching math, and I've been working like a beaver trying to get my students of color. Most of my students are low-income students, but we have a very high-performing high school. Students work really hard there, and I think the urgency is not in high schools to bring STEM education to our students, particularly computer science. If I am encouraged to do anything, I am highly encouraged to make sure my students pass the MCAS. I am highly encouraged to make my students pass the PARCC. I am highly encouraged to make sure that my curriculum matches the Common Core. The people who are making these decisions are not thinking like you all. They are not thinking that our students are going to go into STEM careers. They're finding ways to sort our students out. And it's really sad. There are students in elementary school who spend most of their time testing. I'm lucky I work for an amazing principal, and she fights the district office on that. The urgency should be to give our students what they need, and that is not the urgency. By the time my students get ready to apply to Harvey Mudd, they will not get accepted, because that wouldn't have been the focus. I've been working like a beaver trying to bring Scratch. I've taken courses in Scratch, Lego NXT, and I have not been able to teach those courses. And I did have all my students do 1 hour of code this year. I thought, the hell with them. I'm going to take my students into the lab. They did 1 hour of code. And you know, the students who were most interested in 1 hour of code were 2 girls who were failing my math class. Failing my math class terribly, but they love coding. So I'm going to try to get them to Black Girls Code. So we need to figure out what happens before they get to the college level. Because by the time they get to the college level, there's nothing for them.
The conversation upstairs.
I'm mad.
I'd like to say something to follow up on this passionate woman about the actual preparation of the kids. I have taught junior high science. I'm currently Harvard Medical School faculty, and I'm a sleep researcher. I want you to know that the data on sleep of underrepresented minority kids and kids living in under-resourced environments is shocking. They do not get enough sleep to support learning. And if we don't begin with that, even if we improve the curriculum, they're not going to get what they need. It also is affecting their physical health. They're ending up with weight problems, with high blood pressure, with diabetes. You have to start by giving people a foundation of health. And so if you're going into these